and it's a good thing you're all seated. There will be no Bible study next week.
Oh, I thought it was going to be a lot worse than that.
I'm sure.
We already knew
Hey,
that.
Brian, did you find a new narration? Or are you
No.
waiting for Sandy to
No,
come?
I did not find it.
Oh, and are we going to have summer hiatus again this year?
We
Honey,
will.
that's a long way away. We could be
Actually,
dead.
I haven't given much thought to when I'm going
Don't worry
to
about
quit. It depends
tomorrow.
on the next series that we do after Revelation. So into
If
the
you
summer
park
we go, but I won't do it all summer
He'll
long.
tell you where to come.
Because I wanted to go
He'll
ahead
tell you.
and actually plan it for summer.
Right, you probably have a good, say, 8-week block that you'll be able to use if you want to use that much. Okay, today we dive into chapter 14. And I will start with verse 1.
My daughter.
Oh, again?
Then I
My
looked,
mother likes to-
Oh, okay.
and there before me was the Lamb, standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000 who had his name and his father's name written on their foreheads. So we begin the chapter with the Lamb, Jesus, standing in victory on Mount Zion with 144,000. It's too bad we're all Jehovah's Witnesses here. We'd understand what that means. Well, remember back in chapter 7 we talked about that number, and we said it's not meant to be a specific number. It is a number of perfection, and it is meant to express unlimited total number of people. So don't get hung up on the fact that you may not be included in 144,000.
That's really not all that many.
Yeah, no. And these 144,000, this unlimited host of people, are marked with the name of Jesus and the name of the Father on their foreheads. See, in the ancient world,
Teacher,
yeah,
is that where Jehovah's Witnesses get this from?
I'm sure it is.
Revelation?
I'm sure it is. Well,
Yeah, what
Jehovah's
are you
Witnesses
talking
get everything from Russell. Isn't that his
Yeah,
name?
but my point is the number, and then
Yeah, that's
the fact
probably where
that
they got the number. Where else
Jesus
would they
is
get
on
the
their
number
head
from?
because they're already gone. There are 144. I don't know what
What
these
about
people
the
are.
forehead?
Because they're doing a completely total literal translation.
Okay.
You know, that's where you get into trouble with this kind of thing. Yeah.
I bet you guys are talking in code, and I have no idea what you're talking
Yeah,
about.
what is it? It's been-
Jehovah-
You know, you're
We don't
talking
know
about-
what
you're
we're talking about either.
marking her forehead and all this. I'm going, well,
No, he just said mark on the forehead of Jesus a minute ago.
but they just said Jehovah's Witnesses.
Well, I
does
wondered if that's where they
something
got the 144,000 because it's their number and they're already gone to heaven and
The
there's
Jehovah's
already
Witnesses say that 144,000 is all that can get into heaven.
heaven.
Oh, okay,
And
so you guys
therefore-
are in code there, right?
Now, why they're all faithfully going around witnessing to people when they can't get into heaven any longer, I don't know.
It seems like it's
That's-
like closed group.
that's
They're
their
optimistic.
belief. And this is probably where they got the number.
That's what I wanted to know, if that's where they got it
Special.
from.
I-
I'm sorry, Bruce.
No, that's okay, I
Yeah.
was down
Now,
level
there's an
from
Old
that.
Testament reference to the.
Beg your pardon?
There's an Old Testament reference to the 144.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it was a common, well, it was like a lot of other numbers in Jewish tradition that was supposed to be a number of perfection. 12 times 12, you know, is perfection or whatever. In the ancient world, a mark on a person was very important for a variety of reasons. Now, a mark could have been a tattoo. It could have been a brand. It could have been a stigma of some kind, but it could mean 5 different things. In the ancient world, if you had a mark on your arm or your forehead or whatever, it could mean ownership. If you were a slave, you could have a brand or a tattoo on your body that indicated who owned you. Okay? Another was a mark of loyalty, where someone would voluntarily get a tattoo to show everybody that they were totally loyal to a certain person or to the emperor or to whomever.
Rips, the Bloods, or whatever.
Yes. Or it could have been a mark of security. Say, you know, if I carry this mark around, it means I belong to a very powerful person, and therefore, you know, you don't mess with me because then you have to confront the person that owns me or whatever. Could have been a mark of dependence, or it could have been a mark of safety. Now, if you think about it, all 5 of those apply if you are marked as Christ's. Ownership, loyalty, security, dependence, and safety. They all seem to apply as far as being marked for Christ is concerned, okay? All right. And I heard a sound from heaven like the roar of rushing waters and like a loud peal of thunder. The sound I heard was like that of harpists playing their harps. And they sang a new song before the throne and before the four living creatures and the elders. No one could learn the song except the 144,000 who have been redeemed from the earth. God's voice is like the sound of rushing waters. Okay, you know, we can relate to that. A gigantic crashing tidal wave or the rushing of a huge river makes a lot of noise, and we can appreciate what that means. His voice was also like thunder. Yeah, well, you know, that's okay, we can handle that. But then it says also, his voice was like many harps. Not only is the voice of God powerful, but also gentle and sweet at the same time, and can also calm the heart. So that's what they say that means. They sing a song which only they could learn. Why is it that only the 144,000, the unlimited hosts of the Lord, can be the only ones to sing the song? Because only they had had certain experiences during their life that made it possible for them to learn that song. They had suffered, and suffering had taught them faith and peace and obedience and loyalty. They had learned loyalty during their lives. No matter the trials and tribulations that they went through, they remained faithful and loyal. They had experienced steady spiritual growth. They had increased in wisdom and knowledge. And because of all that, they could learn to sing the song of praise. Okay. Verse 4a is a problem. These, the 144,000, these are those who did not defile themselves with women, for they kept themselves pure. They follow the Lamb wherever he goes. They were purchased from among men and offered as first fruits to God and the Lamb. Yeah, we got a doozy of a problem here, don't we? Especially for this side of the room.
We're defilers.
Yes. It sounds like the special saints gathered before the throne are those who have been celibate. And it sounds like this is belittling marriage. So we need to try and take a look at this for a minute.
It's only men.
The comment is not really meant to describe the unsullied purity of those in the company of the Lamb. But we do well to ask, well, what does that purity really amount to? Does it really mean in order to appear before the throne of God, you have to remain pure in sexual relationships? Oh, it can't possibly be that. Can't possibly be that. Does it mean that those who have kept themselves free from spiritual adultery would not be included? And there are a number of references in Scripture to that. Let me see. Again and again in the Old Testament, we find it said of the people of Israel that they went whoring after strange gods. Okay? So it could be a reference in that regard. And you can find those kind of references in Exodus and Hosea and all over the Old Testament. Does it describe those who have remained celibate? You know, the Roman Catholic Church, of course, as well as the early church, per se, glorified virginity and celibacy. Well, our scholars say, no, that's not the possible explanation. And if I can find it here, I'm sorry, I'm kind of wallowing around in this today, turning back and forth here. I tried to do this in a way that it would make sense. So, let me offer a real possible answer to this strange verse that seems to praise celibacy and belittle marriage, and you can take it or leave it as you so desire. But here is the explanation that William Barclay gives. When scribes were copying New Testament books, they often added notes and comments in the margin that they felt was a further explanation of the text. It may well be that some scribe in later days, copying this passage, decided to give his opinion as to who the 144,000 were, and so he added in the margin, "This means those who never defiled themselves with women and who remain virgins." That's a likely possibility since most of the scribes were monks. Okay? Well, when the manuscript was recopied, the comment in the margin may well have been included in the text, as happened many times. It was very common.
Yeah, there are
occurrence.
documented cases where you can see the marginal things, and then in the subsequent
Right,
ones.
right, and that's how they know that a lot of that took place, if you have the old enough manuscripts. So this would mean then that the first half of verse 4 is not the words of John at all. It's a comment of some monk that was added in at some point. Well, that's about as good an explanation as I can come up with. Satisfies me, because I know that the praising of celibacy and belittling of marriage just simply can't be.
Can whoring after strange God just be as simple as believing and following?
Yes, absolutely. And the people of Israel did it all the time. They were constantly chasing after the gods of the Canaanites and the Amorites and the...
Well, just covering your bases,
Yes, yes.
just in case.
As a matter of fact, that became one of the major issues between Israel and Judea, the Samaritans and the Jews later, because the Jews of Israel considered themselves the only pure-blooded Jews left because they had never deserted their God. But other people, like the Samaritans, who had intermarried with other people and had adopted parts of other faiths, became polluted people and were no longer pure bloods. That's why they hated each other. All right. Now, where was I? They follow the Lamb wherever he goes. They were purchased from among men and offered as first fruits to God and the Lamb. No lie was found in their mouths. They are blameless. This passage is really very simple if you think about it. A Christian is someone who follows Jesus Christ. That's what it says. That's about as simple as things can get. And John refers to these followers of Christ as three things. First of all, they are a sacrifice to God and the Lamb. See, in Jewish tradition, the sacrifice to God was always the first fruits. Meaning, you were always supposed, whether you sacrificed animals on the altar or whether you sacrificed food and grain or whatever it was always the very best, the very first of the fruits that were sacrificed to God, so that God always got the best. The Christian is the best that can be offered to God. One who has consecrated their life to God is the first fruits, the best offering that can be made to God. No falsehood is found in their mouths. They don't lie. Oh boy.
But there's only 144,000.
Yeah, there's 144,000. They are without blemish. See, the sacrificial animal offered to God was always one without blemish. And the priests of the temple would examine the animal very closely to make sure that it was clean and not blemished in any way. So the Christian has become holy and without blame and blemish. I hate this chapter, I really do. Sorry. Then I saw another angel flying in midair, and he had the eternal gospel to proclaim to those who live on the earth, to every nation, tribe, language, and people. He said in a loud voice, "Fear God and give him glory, because the hour of his judgment has come. Worship him who made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and the springs of water." A second angel followed and said, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, which made all the nations drink the maddening wine of her adulteries." A third angel followed them and said in a loud voice, "If anyone worships the beast and his image and receives his mark on the forehead or on the hand, he too will drink of the wine of God's fury, which has been poured full strength into the cup of his wrath. He will be tormented with burning sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and of the Lamb, and the smoke of their torment rises forever and ever. There is no rest day or night for those who worship the beast in his image, or for anyone who receives the mark of his name. This calls for patient endurance on the part of the saints who obey God's commandments and remain faithful to Jesus."
What's the point of all of that if the names are already in the book?
You know what, I'm not sure, I had the same thought myself.
Yeah.
Well, one of the signs which was supposedly to precede the end of the world was that the gospel had been preached worldwide in every nation. Okay. And here in this illustration from Revelation, it has been done. It says to all races, all tribes, all tongues, all peoples, the gospel has been presented. Those have refused it, too bad for you. Those of you who accepted it, you're in good shape. It's an everlasting gospel, which means eternally valid, even in a world that was rushing to its demise. The gospel is therefore the eternal purpose of God for mankind. See, in John's mind, the gospel is the open scroll, God's plan for mankind. The angel of the gospel is strangely followed by two angels of doom. Did you catch that? The first angel is pronouncing the gospel. The next two angels are bringing really bad news, forecasting the end of Rome and all those who worship the beast. Now it says Babylon, but we know now that when he refers to Babylon, he's talking about Rome, right? But, now think about this. The gospel itself, the gospel of Jesus Christ, is a two-edged sword. I mean, for those who receive the gospel and believe in it, it's good news. But for those who do not accept it, it becomes bad news and judgment to those who reject it and are condemned. So much for that. Verse 8. There is a prophecy of the fall of Rome. Rome, again, as I mentioned, is called Babylon repeatedly throughout intertestamental writings. In Old Testament times, see, Babylon had been the very representation of power, lust, luxury, and sin in the ancient world. You know, in the modern world today, America's this great Satan. But Babylon was the baddie, representing all kinds of immorality. So for the early Christians, Babylon had been reborn in the lust and the immorality and the luxury of Rome. And you can check in Isaiah and Jeremiah and find more out about that. All the nations were made to drink of the wine of Babylon's fornication. That's a quote almost word for word from Jeremiah chapter 51. In other words, Babylon, Rome, made all the nations do those things which brought upon them the wrath of God. Hang in there, guys. We'll get through this in just a little while.
Why this interchangeability, or interchanging with Babylon and Rome? Well, something, I mean, we understand Rome, I think, but how does Babylon get the same?
Well, it was just because in Jewish history, see, again, we're talking about somebody who's very Jewish, even though they're Christian. And in Jewish tradition and Jewish history, the Jews never forgot people that had wronged them. They never forgot the Babylonians when they were conquered and carried away into captivity. They never forgot the
Temple
Assyrians
destroyed.
and the Aristocratus Epiphanes, what?
And the temple was,
And the temple was, they never forgot that kind of stuff. And so in their minds, in Jewish history over centuries of time, certain powers like Babylon and Antiochus Epiphanes and so on became the very personification of evil and immorality. And even on into the Christian era, that still carries over in Jewish thought. And of course, a large number of the early Christians were Jews who understood that.
and it's just like in today's political environment, if you want to just squash something right here and now, what, socialist, well, that's the end of that, you don't have to explain anything further. And hey, the Babylonian,
Yeah.
But they were coding their writings,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, yeah, well, John was still trying to hide
Right.
from the Romans what he was really talking about. He was in enough trouble as it was.
Yeah.
The Christians were being persecuted badly enough as it was. And in order to communicate with the Christians and still give them encouragement, but not let the Romans know that he was really personifying them as evil, this is the way he did it. Okay? It's not written in code the way we think of code, like some kind of a mathematical binary code. This was a symbolized code. Okay, does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
No. But none of this
Okay.
makes sense to me, I'm sorry.
Perfect, clear.
It says in verse 12, oh, wait a minute, I'm not through yet here. Now, in verses 9 through 12, it is already given a warning to the power of the beast. Now, it gives a warning to all those who fail in this time of crisis. And guess what? As far as Revelation is concerned, the fate of the Christian who turns away from the Lamb is the worst fate of all. Even worse than non-believers. The reasons for that is that the church was battling for its very existence. If it was to continue, the individual Christian had to be prepared to face suffering and trial, imprisonment, and death. If the individual Christians began to yield, the church would die. In our day, the individual Christian is still of paramount importance, but each one of us, our function now is not usually to protect the faith by being ready to die for it, but to commend it by being diligent to live for it. But in those days, it was different. And so you were told if you desert the faith and turn your back and go with the beast after being a Christian, your fate is going to be worse than anybody's. Didn't believe they had hellfire and damnation preachers in those days.
how well circulated was Revelations in John's time?
We know it was circulated to the 7 churches of Asia.
Okay.
Whether it was done outside that, I couldn't tell you. I don't know. But because of the fact that in the early chapters of Revelation, his letters specifically address issues at those 7 early churches, we know that they at least
Okay.
received it. Whether it traveled beyond that, was passed along to other churches like in Rome or whatever, I don't know. Although the church in Rome would have been under the worst persecution of all. So the wicked will be destroyed in the presence of the Lamb and the angels. This is supposed to be righteous judgment, right? And the righteous are to be given a treat. The righteous are going to be able to watch the punishment take place and revel in it.
Oh, yippee.
What kind of Christian thinking is this?
Now they're Romans.
Yeah. And you know, today we would say, well, this is a pretty distasteful thing, and we would condemn this kind of behavior in a Christian and all that, but But we have not had to go through the agonies of the early Christians. You know, the heathen enjoyed the spectacle of watching the Christians suffer horribly in the Colosseum. The early Christians felt that divine justice would reverse the situation.
Well, then they're no better than the Romans were, in my opinion. That's not a very.
That's what we would say. That's
Yeah.
exactly what we would say.
Well, Christ would say that too.
But if we were being thrown to the lions
I don't know.
and dying in horrible ways, you know, it might change our attitude about how we felt about that too.
But there are some Christians in the world who are
Oh,
persecuted.
lots of them.
You know,
Very
so-
vindictive,
Absolutely.
very nasty, you know. They're the kind of Christians that say, you know, if you don't believe exactly what I believe, you're going to go to hell and burn in the lake of fire for all eternity. And
No, what I meant was like there are places where Christians are truly persecuted. and
oh,
treated
yes,
abominably.
yes, that's true. I'm sorry, I misunderstood.
That's okay.
That's absolutely the
Okay.
case. And you know, if you were to go to China or a Muslim country where Christians are being persecuted and even killed, forbidden to have the Bible, forbidden to go to church and so on, and you were to talk to those people, they might have a little bit of a different attitude than you or I have
Right.
on the very same subject. You know? I mean, after all, people are people, human beings are human. And you know, sometimes, you know, that's just
When
the
you're
only...
way over here, it's
Yeah,
different than when
that's
you're
right,
face to
that's
face.
right. Okay, verse 13. Then I heard a voice from heaven say, "Write, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Yes, says the Spirit, they will rest from their labor, for their deeds will follow them." Now we need to be a little careful with this. Immediately following the terrors to come and the warnings to those who are false or who have turned their back on the Lamb comes a gracious promise to the faithful. And this idea is those who died in the Lord. And I think you can figure out what that means. It's mentioned in the New Testament in a number of places, in Paul's letter to the Thessalonians and the Corinthians as well. It means those who have come to the end of their lives and who have remained faithful and are still one in Christ. Okay. Everything else was trying to separate people from Christ. Everything. But the supreme joy for the faithful was that even at death, they were inseparable from Christ. For those people who were suffering the way they were suffering, that was huge, absolutely huge. So then they are promised rest. When is rest the sweetest?
Is that a question? Oh.
Yes.
When you're exhausted.
After the most strenuous toil of all. That's when rest is the sweetest. So you live your life, you get through the persecutions, you are martyred and killed for Christ, you've survived, rest is sweet. Their works will follow them. Be careful. Be careful here. This does not mean salvation by works. John is referring to the labor and the patience and the successes of the Ephesians and the Thyatirians and those who have worked faithfully and loyally in their various churches.
That doesn't mean just good works, if their works will follow them. It could be bad things too.
Well, I suppose that could be true, although we could get into a real discussion on that. If I'm forgiven, God is supposed to have forgiven and forgotten. I hope that's the case. When you leave this life, all you can take with you is your character, the essence of who you are, and you are still one in Christ when you are that way. You are a character tried and tested, and you will be blessed because of it. But it doesn't mean that you have earned your way in heaven or that you have earned a higher award in heaven because of your works. Okay. Finish up with chapter 14, hopefully. I looked, and there before me was a white cloud, And seated on the cloud was one like a son of man, with a crown of gold on his head and a sharp sickle in his hand. And then another angel came out of the temple and called in a loud voice to him who was sitting on the cloud, "Take your sickle and reap, because the time to reap has come, for the harvest of the earth is ripe." So he who was seated on the cloud swung his sickle over the earth, and the earth was harvested. Another angel came out of the temple in heaven, and he too had a sharp sickle. Still another angel who had charge of the fire came from the altar and called in a loud voice to him who had the sharp sickle, "Take your sharp sickle and gather the clusters of grapes from the earth's vine, because its grapes are ripe." The angel swung his sickle on the earth, gathered its grapes, and threw them into a great winepress of God's wrath. They were trampled in the winepress outside the city, and blood flowed out of the press, rising as high as the horses' bridles, for a distance of 1,600 stadia.
A lot of grapes there.
I know. All of the pictures in this, quote, vision are very familiar to Jewish thought. You got the picture of the victorious figure like the Son of Man on the cloud. This comes from Daniel chapter 7, 13, 14 verses. You got judgment pictured in terms of harvesting. Examples in Joel in the Old Testament as well as Mark in the New Testament. Judgment is also pictured in the winepress. God's judgment is likened to the trampling of the grapes. You can find that in Lamentations and in Isaiah. All of these images are scriptural. Okay. John's just gone through it and picked out a bunch and put them all together, like he's been doing all Revelation long. However, there are two confusing things in this passage as well. Not only does the one like a son of man, Jesus, reap, but also the angel reaps. The risen Lord reaps the harvest of his own people, while the angel with the sharp sickle reaps the harvest of those to be judged. Okay, you get that? The blood came up to the horses' bridles and spread for a distance of 1,600 stadiums. Barclay says the only possible explanation that makes any logical sense at all is that it's meant to describe the completeness of judgment. So, you know, I wouldn't try to make anything more out of it than that. And 2 weeks from now, we will go into chapter 15. Thank you for getting through chapter 14.
Two off-subject questions.
Mm-hmm.
Are there only two named angels, Gabriel and Michael?
No, there's lots of angels.
No, named.
Yes,
Oh, okay.
Are there any female angels?
I don't think so.
Never
Not
recall.
possible.
Not possible. Thank you, I'm sorry.
Now, Don, the women have taken enough of a battering this morning as being those who sully the men.
The second question is, looking at that map that was sent out, is Bible study in the new location at the far end of that area?
At this point,
Yes.
I don't know where it's going to be.
Well, that's where the map indicates that it will be, is